The bar was called something forgettable, a name above a door on a side street in Austin, Texas, in the autumn of 1965, the kind of place that existed in every mid-sized American city in that era, small and slightly worn, with a jukebox in the corner and a low wooden stage at the far end that nobody called a stage. They called it the platform, or the riser, or nothing at all. On a Thursday evening in October, a young woman sat at a corner table with a beer she was barely drinking and listened to a man she had never met sing a song she had known since she was 17. The man was decent. He had a workmanlike voice and an acoustic guitar and the particular confidence of someone who had been playing in bars long enough to know how to hold a room without ever quite filling it. He played the song the way most people played it, cleanly, competently, with the melody intact and the emotion approximate. The young woman at the corner table did not move. She did not sing along. She did not close her eyes or lean forward or do any of the things she normally did when music reached her. She simply sat, hands around the beer glass, and listened to someone else sing the song that she had been singing since before she knew what the words cost. Nobody in that bar knew who she was. That was the point. That was, in a specific and deliberate way, the relief of walking into a room and being nobody. Not the girl from Port Arthur who sang too loud and felt too much and made people uncomfortable with the size of what came out of her. Not the young woman who had spent 3 years in San Francisco trying to make something from a voice that everyone acknowledged was remarkable and nobody seemed to know what to do with. Just a person at a corner table with a beer, anonymous in the ordinary darkness of a Thursday night, with no one expecting anything from her at all. She had not understood until she lost it how much she had needed that. The not being known, the permission, implicit and complete, to simply exist in a room without the room requiring something from her in return. Her name was Janis Joplin. She was 22 years old. She had come back to Texas 6 months earlier, after a first attempt at San Francisco had ended in exhaustion and something harder to name, a kind of hollowing out, a sense that she had been reaching for something that kept moving just ahead of her fingers. She had come home not because home was right, but because everywhere else had temporarily run out, and she had done something that the people who would later write about her rarely mentioned because it did not fit the shape of the story they wanted to tell. She had tried to stop, not performing, not the music itself. You could not take the music out of Janis Joplin any more than you could take the weather out of the sky, but the pursuit of it, the grinding, relentless, humiliating business of trying to make a life from a voice in a world that had not yet decided it needed her voice. She had tried, with genuine and exhausting effort, to want something smaller. Something that would hold still long enough for her to build a life around it. She almost succeeded. That is the part nobody tells. The house she rented in Austin was small and clean and cost very little. She had a kitchen table where she ate breakfast, a second-hand sofa, a record player she allowed herself to use only in the evenings. She had enrolled in classes at the University of Texas, not because she had a clear academic purpose, but because structure felt necessary, because the alternative was an unbroken stretch of unscheduled hours she did not entirely trust herself to fill. She had a routine. She woke early. She made coffee. She went to class and sat in the back row and took notes in a handwriting that her professors, if they noticed it at all, might have described as unusual, large, slightly pressured, the letters leaning hard in whatever direction the thought was moving. She had a boyfriend, a good, uncomplicated man who worked in a hardware store and liked country music and did not ask her too many questions about who she had been before she arrived in Austin. This was not, on his part, in curiosity. It was a kind of courtesy. She had not encountered much and did not entirely know what to do with. She was, by most surface measurements, living a manageable life. The surface measurements were missing something, because underneath the routine, underneath the breakfast and the classes and the boyfriend who asked few questions, there was a sound she could not locate the source of and could not make stop. Not a literal sound, not a melody or a lyric or anything as organized as music. Something anterior to music, a pressure, a frequency. The particular hum of a thing that has not yet been expressed and is running out of patience. She did not sing in those months, or she told herself she did not. In the evening sometimes, when the record player was on and the apartment was dark and no one was there to hear, she would find herself making sounds in the back of her throat, not quite singing, not quite speaking, something between the two, a kind of testing of the instrument to see if it was still there. It was always still there. That was the problem. and also, though she would not have said so at the time, the only reliable comfort she had. The bar on the side street was not a place she went to perform. She went because a woman from her sociology class had mentioned it offhandedly as somewhere that had live music on Thursday nights, and because the apartment had felt particularly small that evening, and because she had learned, in the months since Texas, that small enclosed spaces with no one in them were the worst possible environment for the thing she was trying to contain. She ordered a beer. She found the corner table. She listened to the opening act, a folk duo who were earnest and slightly out of tune, and felt nothing in particular, which felt like progress. And then the man. With the acoustic guitar came on, and inside his second song he played the one she knew. She had learned it at 17 from a scratchy record her friend Powell sent. John had played for her in his bedroom a blues song, old and unembellished, the kind of song that had been sung so many times by so many people that it had worn smooth, all the unnecessary parts ground down by repetition until only the essential remained. She had learned it by feel rather than by instruction, absorbing the melody the way you absorb weather from all directions at once. She had sung it in those early years in small rooms and coffee houses, and once in a bar very much like this one, and people had stopped talking when she sang it, not because they recognized it, but because something in the delivery made stopping feel involuntary. Now she sat and listened to someone else sing it. Someone who had not grown up with it in the throat the way she had, someone who was singing it correctly, cleanly, with respect for the melody and no particular relationship to the emotion underneath. She did not move. She did not correct him even internally, the way musicians sometimes silently correct other musicians. She just listened. And something happened in that listening that she would not understand until much later, from a distance of years and a life lived entirely differently from the one she was constructing in Austin. She understood in that corner, at that table, with the beer growing warm in her hands, that she was not actually in the bar to hear music. She was in the bar because she was the music. And the music, despite every effort she had made in the preceding months, had not agreed to stay inside her where it was manageable and private and safely contained. It was right there in the room with her, in someone else's voice, in someone else's hands, and it was less than it should have been. Not because the man was poor at his craft, he was not, but because the song was asking for something he did not have, something that she recognized because she carried it, had always carried it, and had spent the last 6 months trying to put down. Nobody in the bar knew this was happening. Nobody at the neighboring tables or behind the bar or on the low wooden platform at the far end of the room had any idea that the woman in the corner was going through something that would, in retrospect, look like a turning point. It did not feel like a turning point. It felt like sitting in a bar, listening to a song, realizing that a decision you thought you had made had not, in fact, been made at all. She went home that night and did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark of the small, clean house and listened to the Austin night, distant traffic, a dog somewhere, the particular silence of a city that is not quite large enough to be truly loud, and she thought about the song and the man who had sung it and the thing she had felt in the listening. Not jealousy, not longing exactly, something more specific than either of those, recognition. The recognition of a language she had been trying to stop speaking, and the discovery that stopping speaking a language you were born in does not cause you to forget it. It causes something worse. It causes you to hear it everywhere in everyone, in every approximate version that falls just short of what it should be. The boyfriend was asleep beside her, his breathing steady and uncomplicated. She lay very still because waking him would require explaining something she did not have words for yet, and she was not entirely sure in that moment that she would be able to stop at the explanation. By morning she had not made a decision. Decisions of that kind rarely arrive as decisions. They arrive as a series of smaller recognitions that accumulate until there is nothing left to decide. She got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and did not go to class. She called Powell Sent. John, who had first played her the record at 17 and who was, in the autumn of 1965, still in Austin and still playing music and still one of the few people who had known her long enough to hear what she was not saying. They talked for a long time. She did not tell him about the bar or the song or the man who had sung it. She did not tell him about lying in the dark afterward, or about the way the morning had arrived without resolution, or about the coffee she had made and the class she had not attended. She told him she was thinking about San Francisco again. She told him she thought she might have left too early the first time, before she understood what she was looking for. Powell sent. John was one of the few people in her life who had heard her sing before she knew what she was doing, and had understood, before she did, that what she was doing was not something you improved through practice. It was something you either had or you did not, and the having of it came with its own set of obligations that could not be negotiated away. He listened without interrupting. He had always been a good listener, patient in the way that musicians who write their own material tend to be, attentive to the thing underneath. "What is being said?" When she finished, he said, "You never really stopped, did you?" It was not a question. She did not answer it. The second departure from Texas was different from the first in ways that are difficult to quantify, but that everyone who knew her seemed to feel. The first time she had left Port Arthur at 19, she had left running, away from something she could not name and toward something she could not see. The energy of that leaving was kinetic and slightly desperate, propelled by the particular urgency of someone who has understood that staying will cost more than going. The second time she was 22, and she had already learned what the cost of going was. She had paid it once and come back and tried, with genuine effort, to accept a smaller life. And she had sat in a bar on a Thursday night and understood that the smaller life was not available to her, not because she was special, she would have resisted that framing, but because the thing inside her that needed to be expressed was not interested in her preferences about the matter. She packed lightly. She gave the boyfriend enough warning that the ending was merciful rather than abrupt. She told her mother she was going to California, and her mother said the things mothers said, and Janis listened to them with the patience of someone who had already, privately, resolved the question. She drove west on a March morning in 1966 with the windows down and the Texas flatland opening up around her into a sky so large it felt architectural. She had $40, a change of clothes, and the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have made a decision they cannot unmake. She was not thinking about success or failure or what the music industry might do with her or what she might do with it. She was thinking about nothing more complicated than the song in the bar and the distance between what it had been and what it could have been, and the fact that she was the only person she knew who could close that distance. It was not arrogance. It was the most honest thing she had ever thought. What happened next belongs to a different story, or rather, to the part of this story that everyone already knows. San Francisco. Big Brother and the Holding Company, Monterey, June 1967, where the world discovered what Powell sent. John had known since she was 17, and what Janis herself had known since the bar on the Thursday night, that the distance between her voice and what it was reaching for was not a distance at all. That she was already there, had always been. There, the career that followed was extraordinary by any measure. The records, the performances, the particular and irreplaceable sound of a woman singing from a place below technique, below craft, below the careful management of image, from the place where the song first arrived and was first understood. But the Austin chapter, the 6 months of breakfast and classes and a boyfriend who asked few questions and a record player used only in the evenings, that chapter has its own weight. Its own meaning, not as a detour or a failure or a moment of weakness, but as the place where something essential was confirmed. She had tried to stop. She had tried with real effort and real intention, and for a period of months she had come close enough to feel what it would have been like. A quiet life, a manageable life, a life in which the music stayed. Inside, private, unexpressed, not demanding anything from anyone. And she had sat in a bar and listened to a song and understood that the life she was trying to build was not built on solid ground. That the foundation kept moving, that the movement was the music. Nobody in that bar knew who she was. By the following year, nearly everyone in the world who cared about music would. But the woman who drove west on a March morning in 1966 was not thinking about that. She was thinking about a song and the version of it she had heard and the distance between that version and the one she carried. She was going back to close it. There is a kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside because it does not announce itself. It does not look like the courage of Monterey, the feather boas and the roar and the voice that made 60,000. People go silent before they went loud. That courage was real and it was visible, and it has been written about many times. The other kind, the courage of the Austin kitchen table, of the 6 months of trying, of sitting in the bar and letting the recognition arrive without flinching from what it meant, That kind is quieter and harder to see, and in some ways more demanding. Because what it demanded from Janis Joplin was not performance. It demanded the opposite, the honest acknowledgement that the performance was not optional, that the voice was not a choice she was making, but a fact she was accepting, that the music she carried was not going to wait politely while she arranged a more comfortable life around it. She accepted it, not with drama, not with a grand declaration, but with the quiet pragmatism of someone who has tested the alternative and found it uninhabitable. She drove west, the music drove with her, and the bar on the side street in Austin went on being forgettable, which is what it was, except for the Thursday night in October 1965 when a woman sat in the corner and listened to a song and understood something about herself that she had been trying with considerable effort not to understand. The man who sang it never knew. Nobody in the room knew. The song was returned to its ordinary life, and the woman in the corner paid for her beer and went home and lay in the dark and made, without quite calling it a decision, the only choice that was actually available to her. 6 months later, she was in San Francisco. A year after that, the world knew her name, but the story started in the bar. It started with a song sung by someone else, sung close enough to write that the distance was audible, sung in a voice that was not hers, and in the gap between what it was and what it could have been, Janis Joplin found the only argument she had never been able to answer. The music needed her back, and she went.